Welcome to The Business Edge, brought to you by Central Willamette Credit Union, where we explore the insights, stories, and tools that empower our small business community. Today, we're thrilled to welcome Ellen Yin, founder of Cubicle to CEO, a media company that focuses on empowering women entrepreneurs. Since leaving her corporate Cubicle job in 2017, Ellen has grown a multi-million-dollar business and been featured in publications like Forbes and Business Insider. She interviews some of the world's top entrepreneurs in her own podcast, and she's passionate about demystifying what success looks like in entrepreneurship and teaching simple, scalable strategies for growth. We're excited to dive into her journey and get some actionable advice for small business owners just like you. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us and taking the time to be here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to chat with you, Michelle and Eric.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I love the name too. Can you kind of tell us how you came up with the Cubicle, the CEO name? That's awesome. I love that name.
Yeah, it's kind of a nod to my own journey. I worked in a cubicle when I was 23 years old for 10 months. So it was a very short stint that I had in the corporate world, but I ended up quitting.
It was enough though, right?
Yeah. It was pretty clear. It was not the right path, or at least the industry I was in healthcare marketing. It wasn't fulfilling my creative, desires or whatnot. So I ended up quitting that job when I was 23. It was a couple days before Christmas. And actually at the time I wasn't planning to start a business. I just thought I'll move to Portland and look in a bigger market for a marketing role that would be a better fit, maybe something with more creative allowances. And during that process in January, when I was searching for another job, I actually ended up reconnecting with a colleague of mine who worked at the company I had left. And he and his wife owned a family coffee business. So they had these two local coffee stands actually here in Albany. They no longer own them,
That's
but
awesome.
Shout out to Pacific Perk. And they became my first clients. And so that was kind of what threw me into this world. Is I realized, I have these skills that I can monetize outside of a traditional 9-to-5 job. Let me see if I can build up my client portfolio and replace my salary with clients instead. And that's what I leaned into. And now it's been, almost 8 years. A lot has changed. My business model has changed drastically. I no longer do done-for-you marketing services for clients, but it was what launched me into the CEO part of Cubicle to CEO.
That's awesome. So you started out just going off of what you were trying to get into, and then it just kind of turned into something completely different then, or like along the lines of something new. Exactly.
Yeah. I just thought, I don't really have much to lose. I think that's kind of something I had on my side, is because I was so young, there was definitely a lot of naivete, but also there was less risk, right? I think I didn't have anyone that was depending on me for income. I wasn't married. I didn't have children. And so it allowed me to take some of these bigger risks that I might not have done had I been in that same situation later in life.
Sure. Sometimes naivety, I can't even say that word.
Naivete.
Being naive. There we go. So use that word. But I've heard that's like kind of the best way when you're an entrepreneur, because you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly.
And a lot of people overthink it instead of jumping in and doing it, where the people who have that naiveness is just like, they just do it. Yeah.
Exactly. And I will say, I think that is the greatest common thread I have observed in successful entrepreneurs that I've come across, is that they have an extreme bias towards action, and they understand that a lot of what creates their success is in the doing, not the planning.
That makes sense.
So talk about the mind shift that you had to go through, because I know working in a not traditional 9-to-5, it's a very stable mindset. You just do kind of what is expected of you. What changes when you start your own business?
Ooh, it's funny that we're talking about this, because I just came off a podcast interview on my show, Cubicle to CEO, earlier this morning, and we were talking about how prioritization is really key as an entrepreneur. And I think that's one of the greatest learning experiences and challenges that people face transitioning from working for someone else or within a more structured organization to working for yourself, because you have everything to do and no clear direction at the same time. So you really have to be able to hone in on what are the priorities and be self-motivated to create those opportunities and to create the foundations and frameworks, because nothing exists, right? You're just starting from a blank page. So while it's exciting because there's so much freedom, it can also be very overwhelming for some people because there are no guardrails. So you really are building the plane as you fly it.
That's awesome.
That's scary too. Definitely. Yeah. And I can see why that would be overwhelming. It's like, where do you even begin? And I think knowing where you plan to go is probably a good place to start. How do you go about figuring out what your goals are, what your strategic plan is, and planning out what it is that you're trying to do?
And on top of that, how do you make sure you stay honest with your own personal feedback? Because I mean, again, knowing those things is great, but if you're not quite, how do you keep yourself accountable for what your own shortcomings are?
Yeah. And admittedly, it is hard because so much of what we do as business owners, as entrepreneurs, feels really personal. But you have to be able to separate your feelings from the data. And I think I've really learned to fall in love with data over the years, which is not something I ever thought I would say. I'm not someone who is, naturally inclined toward math or numbers. I'm definitely more of a creative brain. But in business, you have to be obsessed with the data. And so for me, I kind of think of every new venture I try as akin to being like a scientist in a lab. It's so easy to, try something in your business and to let it mean something negative about yourself if the outcome isn't quite what you hoped for, if you miss the mark. But I think we have to remind ourselves that it's no different than a scientist conducting an experiment and saying, this is my hypothesis for what I think is going to happen. You won't know until you complete the test or experiment, right? But let's say your hypothesis is proven wrong. I grew up with a scientist as a dad. Never would he then look at his experiment and say, woe is me, I'm unqualified to be a scientist. I'm a terrible scientist, right? No, that's not how it works in that world. You would simply look at the information, the new information, and go, okay, I need to adjust accordingly based on this new information that I have. And so I've really tried to adopt that mindset over the years, because I think otherwise you get so stuck in it has to be this linear A, B, C, D, when in reality, a lot of it is like, okay, I only see the first thing in front of me. Let me just try this A. And I think this might be a probable outcome. But if it isn't, it grants you more clarity to then figure out what the next step is. And I think that's really the best that you can do when you're in a position like this.
So anyone out there, it's the data. As much as you hate looking at spreadsheets and numbers, I know I go cross-eyed every time. I'm just like, oh God, I don't want to look at another sheet. But once you actually dissect it and read it, it's just so eye-opening. I mean, again, like sometimes you may not have the success you thought you would, but you would never know that without the data. Like it might be a great, like for example, a marketing campaign. Yeah. Everything's beautiful. It looks great. It's probably the best thing you've ever created, but it doesn't, people don't relate to it. So you won't know that without going through the data. I don't know if it's Thomas Edison or Nikola Tesla, but one of them said, I didn't fail 1,000 times. I found 1,000 ways not to do it.
Exactly.
They're wrong. That along those lines, he's like, I didn't fail. I just found ways not to do it the right way. So he uses it as a success. It's like even failures can be success because they lead you to new areas and new ways to try things.
Yeah. And I think to that point, that process of elimination that you just mentioned, that is just as valuable as finding something that works. Finding what you don't like, what you don't want to repeat is just as valuable information as finding something that's a winner right off the bat. So absolutely.
Yeah, because a lot of times, people who start businesses are experts in that field. And a lot of times your own expertise, you can get clouded by that judgment. Because, again, you might be the expert, but it might not resonate other places. And the only way to find out is the data. And that's how you adjust and become a better expert.
Yes, 100%.
And so your Cubicle to CEO started off as a marketing agency and it pivoted. What was the data that you saw that you decided to then change? How do you decide not to stay on this track that you're on and pivot your business?
So this answer might actually surprise you. And this also kind of plays into how business is, it's a science, but it's also an art, right? And I am very much an intuition-led person. So on paper, if we were to have looked, so I started my business in 2018. Towards the end of 2019, when I made my first big shift in my business, if you had just looked on paper, it would not have made sense from a purely logistical standpoint for me to have shifted my business model at all, because if anything, all markers were trending upwards in growth, right? We at that point had worked with dozens of clients. At the time when I was running an agency, most of our clients were e-commerce brands or consumer brands. One of our largest clients was a company that basically pioneered the cauliflower foods craze in grocery stores.
Everything's cauliflower.
Everything's
today.
cauliflower.
Yeah,
You
so.
can thank my friend Amy Lacey.
Thanks, Amy.
Yeah,
I do love cauliflower.
Yeah, so they were one of our first clients, and we had done a lot of successful campaigns, and our agency was growing very quickly. So if you had looked at that on paper, you would have said, oh, the trajectory says to continue doing what you're doing. But what I realized over those 2 years of working behind the scenes with a lot of different clients and on their accounts is that while I was good at what I did and my team was good at what we did, it didn't necessarily make me excited when I looked, let's say, 5 years into the future and said, would I be happier if I just had a larger agency with more clients? And the answer was a clear no. And so that's something that the numbers couldn't have told me, right? Only inner reflection could have solidified that for me. But I took a pretty big risk, actually, and I ended up letting go of all of but one of my clients and kind of had to restart from ground zero in terms of revenue. And at that point in the summer of 2019, I had launched Cubicle the CEO, the podcast. At that time, there was no revenue model to that. It was just a passion project. Yeah. And then when I shifted into an education business model, essentially, I launched my first digital program. I started creating courses and online products, and I wanted to create educational resources for other small business owners, other entrepreneurs like myself, and really allow myself to create more impact at scale. And so that's what we kind of did in our business then for the next 3.5 years. And then somewhere around the middle of 2023 is when we pivoted again to what is now our current business model, where we do media. So essentially content is our product. And we work a lot with like brand partners and sponsors, such as, the collaborations that we've done in the past with Central Willamette Credit Union, which has been so fun and fulfilling. So that's kind of the evolution, if you will, of the last 8 or so years.
So moral of the story is you're not afraid to pivot and start new. That seems to be a common theme, especially with entrepreneurs. It's like you can't be afraid to be trigger shy, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I guess what other advice would you give to anyone who wants to start a business and might be held back by that fear of change? Like what would you give them to help motivate them to jump into something like their own business?
I would say first, change is inevitable. In the game of entrepreneurship, you have to be friends with change because every day is literally constantly throwing new inputs at you. And if you don't like that, there's actually, this is kind of a little bit of a tangent, but I think it applies here if you give me a second.
Oh,
but
yeah, no worries.
there was a really interesting interview question I heard one time where someone said, one of the questions they liked to ask people is, are you someone who would rather be given the same puzzle every day at your job and try to get better and better at solving it? So faster, more efficient, whatever it is. Or are you someone that thrives in a scenario where every day you're given a different puzzle? And if you are not the latter, so the latter would obviously be someone who's more like an entrepreneur. If you are someone who likes predictability and structure and efficiency at one specific thing. Stability, exactly. You may not actually enjoy entrepreneurship. And of course, with any career track, there's highs and lows. So no path is perfect. But I think there's also a little bit of a myth sometimes where people, they see entrepreneurship glorified in a certain way in the media, and it makes them feel like, oh, this is like the better path. I don't necessarily think that's true. I think certain people would not do well in this sort of situation. So if you don't like change, that's something I would first reflect is like, is this truly a path you want to take? But if it is, I would say just understand that as an entrepreneur, think of your business as a playground. Like you get to go out and do different experiments. You get to play in your playground every single day, and you have to really want that and embrace that change to succeed in this path.
That's a great way of looking. I never heard that before.
Yeah,
it's
I like
playground.
the playground. I also like the puzzle question. That's a fantastic way to start out figuring out that's a path for you. And then go back a little bit. You said something about it's not an exact science, more of an art.
Yeah.
I love that. That philosophy was great.
Thank you.
And like it sounds like, again, the art side of it is how does it relate to you? I mean, the numbers might be there, they might not be there, but how can you look out past that and be creative, I guess?
100%. I think too, one other thing I would just give as a piece of advice to any newer entrepreneurs or business owners is your number one focus in those first 30 days, 60 days, 90 days is to get your first dollar, to get someone to pay you something. So I think a lot of people get lost in the weeds of like, I want to make this beautiful website and create this branding, and I'm going to do all of these things like print myself business cards and go to these networking events and do all the appearances of a business. But in reality, none of that matters if no one has validated your concept for a product or service. And the only way to truly validate it is not people singing your praise and saying, oh, that's such a great idea, I'll definitely support your business. They have to vote and pay with their dollars. And so my obsession, if I were starting over as an entrepreneur in any business, is how do I get my first customer as fast as possible to test and validate an idea? And sometimes that means pre-selling your service or pre-selling a product that doesn't even exist yet, just to see if someone's willing to pay it, and then you can deliver on it.
It's like more of a soft rollout kind of.
Exactly.
You're like actually limiting your exposure and then perfecting the actual product while you're limiting that. And obviously scaling, you would want to put those things in place, but not until until everything's proven. So that's a great call out. I like that.
Yeah, and I do think that you're correct. I mean, I see it all the time where people are paralyzed in fear because they don't have the logo that they want, and they don't have the business cards and the website and the social media and all of these things. But I also think that is something that prevents them from moving, from doing.
I think that's that mindset too when you're in a corporate world, is like you do have that structure, you do have the dollars coming in, so those things are the first things you focus on. You don't roll out a new product without having all the pieces behind it, where in the entrepreneurship that you have to actually roll out the product first, make sure it works, because that's, again, you have to have revenue coming in, and then put the things in place. Once you realize these people want it, it worked out well, here's the issues, we fixed those, now I can roll it out on a larger scale, and then worry about my website, and then worry about everything else. So
I always tell people who, exactly what Michelle said, get stuck in that analysis paralysis. I always tell them, if you're not embarrassed by your first attempt at something, you waited too long to start. And I think about my podcast, like I'm proud of what we've built, how we've grown our show, over the last 5-some years. Like we've had amazing things happen. Like our podcast has been featured in Times Square, or,
that's awesome.
We charted #1 in entrepreneurship, before. Like we've done all these big milestones, but it started with the ugliest Canva graphic. That was my first podcast cover art. And it started with a $99 mic, and I'd never go back and listen to my first episode because I cringe when I hear my voice, but those things had to have happened before we reached where we are now. And had I just waited for perfection, I don't think we would have accomplished half the things. We definitely wouldn't have made it to, almost 400 episodes now. So
you have to fail before you can succeed. And a lot of times people, like you said, are just scared to fail.
Yeah.
But I always say, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. Complacency is the death of growth. So if you're not constantly feeling like you're not enough, you're not trying to push yourself into something new and learn anything new. So that's awesome.
Agree.
So I know like side hustle culture and just hustle culture in general is a really big trend that was going on. But on the flip side of that, I think there is a strong push for work-life balance. How does that work when you're an entrepreneur, when the business is yours? How do you navigate?
Yeah, how do you prevent burnout?
Oh, the $1 million question, right?
Yeah.
It used to be about finding balance. Now we all gave up on that. We're like, let's just not burn out.
Balance, right? Yeah, that's so funny. I want to balance my life. I just want to survive.
Let's just survive to the next day. To be honest, I have truly never met an entrepreneur whose brain like actually turns off of their business. I think it's it comes with the type of personality who would be attracted to. I mean, some people say like entrepreneurship is like a form of masochism. Like you're literally like, you're trying to, you're doing something that requires, quite frankly, some suffering. And so I think it's a little bit unrealistic, I think, sometimes to try to hold yourself to the standard of, again, comparing apples to oranges, right? You can't necessarily treat your business the same way that you do a 9-to-5 job where you clock out and you're just done. However, are there ways to create boundaries and systems and things that allow you to be away from the business, to pull out and still have the business survive without you? Absolutely. And so I think it's, for me, it's less about finding this perfect balance and more so looking at my life in seasons. So last summer, for example, I had a lot of personal things going on in my life. I had entered my first pageant. I ended up winning Mrs. Oregon.
Oh, that's awesome.
I went to Vegas to compete at Mrs. America. I was like, not available for a good portion of the summer because I was preparing for that. I was also at the same time selling our home and building a duplex from the ground up. There was a lot going on in my personal life. And so I understood in that season, my business was going to take a backseat. My sole goal was just to, stay stabilized and survive during that season. There are other times where, right now my business is a huge focus of this summer. We have a large 200-person business event coming up in September that we're hosting here in Oregon. That takes a lot of mental headspace and time and energy and focus. And so I understand other things may fall to the wayside in favor of that. And so I think you just have to understand in certain seasons, other things will take priority, and understanding it's not always going to be a perfect even split or balance, if you will, but rather how can you create harmony in those seasons between the different aspects of your life.
Understanding the flow, the yearly flow of your business is a great way to kind of like prepare for that. So the down times, that's when you usually want to take time off, obviously, and the high times. But also, I guess, like setting structures in place for when you I heard of that causes the most burnout, and why people fail after having a successful business for so long is the person who put it together runs the whole thing. Yep. They don't put any structures in place for it to run without them. So once you get everything set up and structured, get your business out there and actually selling products, you got to put it in place and set it up to survive without you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the ultimate test for sure.
Yeah. And I find that a lot of these entrepreneurs, their business is their baby, their passion. They love it. So it is work, but it's not, because it's their passion. It's what they love. So
it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like work. So I can see why turning it off at night when you're at home isn't a reality. But being able to be present with your family or whatever obligations, still being able to do that and not lose those relationships is paramount.
Yes, absolutely. And I think a lot of it is like setting your own boundaries and saying, maybe your brain wanders and you think of a new idea, but saying, I'm not gonna check my email after this time. I'm not responding to things right away. Nothing is an emergency. My friend Adrienne always says, we're not creating oxygen. I think a lot of business owners treat everything like an emergency. And in reality, it's like most businesses, not all, but 99.9% of us are not truly in charge of life or death situations. So it is okay. It can wait.
That's a great way to put that. Kind of shifting gears, you said you guys focus on empowering women entrepreneurs. What are some unique challenges and advantages do you think women entrepreneurs have today?
I think advantages of women entrepreneurs is that we are very communal, right? Like I think women are really, really good at creating tribes, communities, relationships. We're also, I think, feminine energy just tends to be very intuitive. I think a lot of the female entrepreneurs that I admire most, they lead a lot with instinct. And I think that's a huge advantage to lean into as women. I think the weaknesses or disadvantages, let's say, of being a woman in business is honestly, a lot of them are financial. And, that's built into the systems of our, not just our country, but just, the way the world has operated for many years. I mean, a lot of people know women couldn't even open their own credit cards, until like the mid 80s. So it's not that far off of a distance.
I didn't know it was
history.
the 80s. I thought it was like wow, that's news to me. That's crazy.
It's pretty wild. And so, having only had really a few decades of true financial independence or ability, women are still severely underfunded. Venture capital goes to like 2% of venture capital goes to women-owned businesses. It's really quite alarming, despite stats and data showing that any founding team with a woman on the team tends to not only perform better, but has higher profitability, longer, sustainability in business. So it's interesting. It's this dichotomy of the data doesn't really match the practice. And so I think there's a lot still that can be improved there, but that's why it's so important to have institutions like Central Willamette Credit Union that believe in uplifting not only women, but just reinvesting in local communities and having financial partners that can see those gaps and really try to fill them, I think is so essential to making real progress there, because it is more than an individual thing. It really is on the institutional level.
Yeah. So it's not just that there's a lack of women applying for these finances.
Correct.
It's just the fact that just not being awarded any of those
Exactly.
things.
Yeah.
Wow. So there's financial barriers for that. And then again, that's the great thing about a credit union is we do work to serve the underserved. So it's a huge part of our mission.
Yeah. I think that's part of the beauty of our relationship and our partnership is that we kind of have those same goals. And yeah, we are very grateful for that. Is there anything else that you would recommend for women-owned businesses or maybe even the community? What can we do to kind of really help elevate these businesses?
I think, to support other businesses, it really is just about intentionality, right? You can obviously support local businesses and women-owned businesses with your dollars, but so much of what we can do is free. You can share businesses, you can refer, you can show up for events, you can just make your presence there. And I think that cannot be overstated enough how much that means when people just show up for others and for each other. And so I think that's huge. But also, of course, backing legislation that makes it easier for women or for underrepresented founders to have access to the same resources and funding is huge as well. Even thinking about, within your own teams or your own projects, how are you using your platforms to spotlight or highlight underrepresented founders? I think that's huge. And, in my personal life, because I'm so passionate about the fact that women don't have, equal access to funding, I became an angel investor. And so I've angel invested in 3 women-owned startups, and I was very intentional about choosing strong women who were leading companies in vastly different industries. And one of the angel investments I happened to make is in a company called Cherub. They are a financial tech company that think like dating app mechanics meets angel investing. So it matches founders who are seeking funding with funders, angel investors, individually wealthy people who want to invest and cut checks, small checks anywhere between $5,000 to sometimes $100,000 to these individual businesses. And to date, I think Cherub, we just, exited beta, but has already funded over $3 million to founders.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, on the platform, and many of them are women or historically underrepresented founders. And so I think just finding these communities or finding these opportunities to put your own skills and network to support something that you care about.
Do you know if there's anywhere people can go to find out what businesses are owned by females? You know if there's a resource for that? Like, you have a page for, because you work with a lot of your partners are female owners. So,
well, a really great institution, WeBank, it's WBENC. That's like a certification that companies can go through to state that they are majority owned, female owned. And so that's a great certification to look out for. But also, if you want to find like a whole database, WeBank would be a great resource. I think the SBA also does a great job of, being able to identify women-owned businesses. And there's so many amazing communities and networks out there that are really geared towards women-owned businesses. So, even our platform, Cubicle to CEO, we help, we welcome and support all founders, but our priority is women-owned businesses. And so you can kind of see that come through in some of our marketing and whatnot. And so there's lots of resources out there, but WeBank is a good one to start with.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ellen, for taking the time again to be with us, to travel all the way down here to little old Albany. We really appreciate you coming and sharing your wisdom, your story, and the advice that you've given us today.
Yeah, we're so thankful again. Like, part of our mission is to help exactly what you're doing, like, help the underserved. And so just having partnerships like yours is so valuable to us and our members. So we really appreciate you coming in and sharing some of it.
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, to our listeners, if you want to find more about Ellen, you can find her at cubicle2ceo.co, or you can tune into her podcast, Cubicle to CEO, and hear about more conversations she has with other entrepreneurs. We appreciate you listening, and be sure to follow us and leave us a review. It'll help us find more business owners like you and help us grow. We really appreciate you taking the time to listen, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
The information provided here is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with a qualified financial advisor before making any financial decisions.